now 5 p.m. on March 6, 2023, and now call to order the policy committee meeting for the Belton Independent School Board of Trustees. A quorum is not present. We do have an agenda before us. As far as public comments, Erica, you handed me 3. Right?
Yes, sir.
And it appears that all these deal with item 3B on the agenda. First person is Tricia Richner.
I'm from Temple, and I've had a job in this district since 2006. I've been a room mother, a chaperone, a volunteer, a founding member of both Tarver and High Point elementary PTAs. I have served on the Book Reconsideration Committee and also currently serve on the SHAC. I'm an invested and involved parent. I did complete the book reconsideration process for genderqueer. I would like to just state that this policy and process is deeply flawed. The first round of reviews consisted of only 12 books, I think, and we met as a member committee, 9 committee members, and each group only reviewed 1 book. Everyone was given a copy of the disputed book, and we were required to read it in its entirety before returning to the committee with our findings. The irony of taxpayer dollars purchasing copy after copy of inappropriate material was not lost on me. Let me pause to state here that it was deeply disturbing to evaluate this book. I took the task very seriously and documented at least 22 penal code violations. There were several illustrations of various executory functions, scenes of sexual acts, masturbation, and sodomy. The removal of this book should have been swift, immediate, and permanent the moment it was discovered. With 22 penal code violations, someone should have had the authority and responsibility to remove it. The current policy as it stands shifts the burden of discovering, locating, and reporting inappropriate content to parents and other community members. This is wrong. No parent should have to sit behind a keyboard, searching library databases, looking for pornography in their child's library, let alone read and then document the violations for the reconsideration process. As a parent in this district, I should have confidence that my students' libraries are safe. A full audit of all high school and middle school libraries is necessary immediately. I'm sure you know this is happening all across the country, so there has to be a company that specializes in this type of audit that can assist our district. After a full and complete audit, the responsibility of monitoring content should fall to trained librarians and their staff at the individual school level, with oversight provided by the board. It should not take a committee to remove content that breaks the law. Lastly, it is critically important to train and educate librarians and library staff in the Texas Penal Code. Librarians and their staff should know and understand the law and then be able and required to remove content that violates the law. Thanks.
Jan Brown?
Janet Brown from Mortgage Point Resort. And we know on December 12th, or December 11th, I had a email conversation with Deanna Love Smith. And it was about, because I wanted to submit another book review, because we knew that the link had been taken down and then it was put up. And during that email conversation, it was explained to me that in order to initiate a review, I have to first meet with the librarian. And so in my correspondence with Deanna, I was like, okay, why is there a gatekeeper on this type of review process? Because if the book is obscene, it has explicit details in it, really to sit there and listen. I've met with Melinda before, the head librarian, and to listen to all the literary awards that a book may have has no bearing on whether this book has sexually explicit content in it. I mean, whether it has porn in it, really. So really, that is just a gatekeeper to prevent people from going to the actual review process. So anyone who wishes to submit a review should be able to do so, and the link should be readily available. If you want to be on the review committee, that's available. But if you want to submit a book to be reviewed, you cannot do that without an in-person, meetup. Now also, we know that there are many, many obscene, sexually explicit, and pornographic books available to minors in Belton ISD libraries. We are discovering books almost on a daily basis as they come to light and we get into the go forward and go look. There needs to be a complete retraining of staff and admin on what constitutes this category and understanding, and then a dedicated audit to remove these books. In addition, any challenge in reviewing these books should not be arduous. It should be clear-cut and simple. It should be a short time frame. As a review policy happens, a few questions and observations. What is going to happen to the 2 books that were challenged and did not move past the initial challenge? They were deemed not to be obscene. And so my question is, knowing that there is a flaw in the review process, those 2 books need to be reviewed again. Because quite frankly, the people that challenged those 2 books, they were done. They read the books, they read the pornography in it, they were just done, and they were not going to proceed with another level of grievance. So the bottom line is that we have to discontinue normalizing this type of material that's available to our children. So thank you for listening to that, and I hope that you sincerely do something to rectify this issue. Thank you.
I figured I would
Your name?
left, okay? So Brenda Howard, Belton, Texas. First of all, thank you so much for removing the 2 books. I do appreciate that. I'm speaking on agenda item 3B. I was assuming it was books. This is why it's so difficult to provide feedback to the school board trustees. The agenda says policy follow-ups, and that could be the book review policy, or it could be something else. Notwithstanding the ambiguity of the agenda item, we're going to go ahead and speak on the book policy. Having gone through the entire process that lasted 6 months, I'd like to see the book review process change. But before that happens, there is a preemptive, informal step that Belton ISD should take. This would involve training regarding minor children, the Texas Penal Code, the interpretation of the code, and what constitutes obscene materials and the distribution of those materials to minors. For example, on November 12, 2021, and I just made a copy for you guys, a letter was sent from Matt Smith and Deanna Love Smith to the Honorable Matt Krause, Chairman, Texas House Committee on General Investigation. The letter states at the top of page 2, to the district's knowledge, it does not possess any books or content with sexually explicit images or with graphic representation of sexual behavior that have been determined to violate the law. So I printed off page 3. There's actually 9 pages of books listed, and at the top of that page we can see the title Gender Queer. So we know that Matt Smith and Deanna Love Smith were mistaken about what constitutes a violation of law regarding sexually explicit content. And this lack of discernment permeates Belton ISD. When discussing this problem with other school districts, it's apparent that each school district has a different method of handling the discovery of sexually explicit content in their libraries. Some acknowledged that the content violated the Texas Penal Code and removed the books. A few decided it was an LGBTQ issue and removed the books for the wrong reason. Some, specifically Belton ISD, redirected to everything other than the actual problem. This put us on a long and miserable path of trying to remove books that clearly violated the Texas Penal Code and could be removed for that reason alone. There are ISDs in Texas that have never had public comments about books at any of their board meetings. If they did find a book that violated the Texas Penal Code, they simply removed them because they had the discernment to do so. I doubt that this could happen at Belton ISD because there's an interpretation of the Texas Penal Code that I disagree with. That's why I recommend 2 steps. Training specifically on sexually explicit content for every librarian, teacher, administrator, etc. to a full audit, which the other two had said, of all the library books. Legislators are currently working on 2 bills that simply remove the obscenity exemption at all, completely. However, the Reader Act, HB 1655, causes the vendors to put out a rating system. So when you're purchasing books, the onus is on the vendor to tell you what content is actually in the book. Thank you very much, I appreciate it.
Okay, now we move down to 3A.
Trustees, thanks for being here today. We're gonna hit EHD, Local Basic Instructional Program, Elective Instruction. Dr. Bud Smith has a brief update for you. These are based on the TASB policy review, local policies that we've been working our way through throughout the school year this year.
So it is a recommendation that we delete this policy, and we do not offer hunter education as a class, and so therefore there is no need to have this policy. That's
Pretty easy.
it. Crazy.
Why was it there?
I honestly, I don't know if that was from years ago.
Like, when I was in high school?
Potentially,
Way back in the day.
I'm not gonna say anything about that, because I know our graduation years are really, really close. But to my knowledge, we've never offered that course since I've been here, and so it just needs to be removed.
So that's the reason, okay.
Very simple.
Next one, FFAC, Local Wellness and Health Services Medical Treatment. Mike Morgan's gonna give you an update on this one.
Good to see y'all this evening. So this is one that we had brought as part of the updates, I guess back in December or January, and we had a couple of other things we really wanted to take a look at. So bringing it back now to circle back. First, whenever it talks about under the medication provided by district athletic program, so this is something that we wanted to make sure that we had a chance to speak a little more in depth with our athletic staff, make sure that the conditions laid out in the revised policy are actually what we would like to do. So with meetings between health services and athletic trainer, we would like to coordinate that in certain situations only, with limited and, as it says here, prior parental consent, and either after school hours or in an off-campus or traveling situation, that athletic trainers would be allowed under certain conditions to provide some non-prescription medication. And the examples of things that generally would be more like ibuprofen and things of that nature. So feel pretty good about this. I know that even from my background in athletics, it's been a fairly common practice to get parental consent and to have some of those medications available. But we did want to make sure, after consulting with TASB, that we have it appropriately written in our policy and protect our trainers, but also outline what those best practices might be. The second thing there on page 2 is the administration of opioid antagonist medication. This is something that is with the increase in opioid usage in our society, and with the introduction of fentanyl in some of these products, something that we felt like we wanted to try to get ahead of. This would allow the district to purchase and store opioid antagonist medication. In some cases, there are grant programs where we can receive these free of charge. The key points to this policy would be that we would like to have a system in place where we have trained district employees. So for right now, our nursing staff has already had this training, but we would want to include this in our safe schools where all staff would be trained in the symptoms that you might see from an opioid overdose, but also in how to use the naloxone or Narcan or whichever one of the products would be available to us, and then to also have a standing order in place that would be approved by a physician licensed to practice medicine. So the standing order has been administered through the University of Texas system. There's all kinds of trainings out there that we would make sure that our staff had, and then we would make sure that, just like we've done with the unassigned epinephrine, that we would like to have the opioid antagonists available to our staff in case of an emergency. So those were really the two major changes that we wanted to come back with. We wanted to make sure the language was right. There was also some language in the original TASB recommendation about off-campus unassigned epinephrine, but we don't take epinephrine. We have instances where we have it off-campus. So it's an on-campus service that we provide training to our staff, and in the case that we have a person that has a allergic reaction, goes into anaphylactic shock. I would open it for questions and discussion. And I do want to thank Mary Lisa Fanning, our Director of Health Services. She's been doing a lot of the legwork on this, has been working with the different teams, and she was with me as we consulted with TASB to get a final language on this program. So she's done a lot of good work around this. We do feel like in the case of the opioid antagonistic medication, it's going to do a lot to help keep our students and staff safe in the event of emergencies.
Mike, can you look with me on page 1 of 3?
Sure.
In the middle, medication provided by district. In that first sentence, it says the district shall purchase certain non-prescription medications. As I was reading this, I was thinking, wait a minute, non-prescription. If you read the whole thing, I know what's being talked about, but non-prescription medication to me means non-prescription medication like ibuprofen, those kinds of things. But here you're talking about the EpiPens, right?
Well, in that section, we are talking about non-prescription medications. So those are the conditions under which, if protocols are established by the district's medical advisor and if parental consent was given, and then it goes on to say that the only time that we're really doing that is in athletic program circumstances.
Okay.
So the epinephrine section gets to, it really is introduced whenever we get past the point 2 under athletic programs. So it's two separate things.
So you have, sometimes there's occasionally you have to give a non-prescription medicine in an emergency, and that happens. I mean, I'm not being funny or anything, I'm just trying to figure out what that means there.
It means, in layman's terms, it would be, you're at a Friday night football game and a kid's got a tension headache and you give him an ibuprofen
Oh, okay.
hours before the game starts.
So it's not an emergency basis like it says here.
Mayor, what page are you looking at? I'm missing the spot. It's the first page of that policy.
Yeah, first page.
Okay.
The district shall purchase certain non-prescription medications to administer to students only on an emergency basis and in accordance with
So
protocols.
you're struggling with the word emergency.
Yes.
Can I ask Tyler to weigh in on if that
Yeah.
concerns him or not?
Yeah, for sure. I think the policy is constructed here creates a distinction between what is emergency basis and what is athletic program. So the emergency basis section, I guess that would be problems 1 and 2, wouldn't necessarily apply to administration through the athletic program, as Mr. Morgan's indicated. So is that?
And that was kind of the question as we posted to TASB was, do we need a separate athletic program distinction, or does that fit underneath points 1 and 2 under the emergency basis? And they said they would prefer there to be a separate distinction for athletic programs.
So adding that section probably solves the challenge that we're talking about right now.
Okay.
So if to the example that Mike brought up, if a kid had a tension headache, an hour before a game with proper parental permission, and the way I read this, I think, is the student would be able to be given Advil or something for that.
Okay. I was looking at it in two different pieces. The first piece is somebody on campus.
Outside of that exclusion, and please correct me if I'm wrong on this, the only time we would give any student non-prescription medication is if it fell under number 2 on the medication provided by parent, and that would be if a parent provided non-prescription medication. Our policy will allow us to do that up to 5 days, but we wouldn't extend it past 5 days.
Okay. See, so these non-prescription medications, you can't give them unless there's an emergency and there's parental consent, right? What if there's an emergency and you don't have parental consent?
Then we wouldn't administer any
Yeah.
medication.
You have to go.
It's called parent to come pick them up.
Yeah, okay.
So I think an important distinguishing factor there there would be, there wouldn't need to be an emergency situation for you to administer it through the athletic program with the way that it's currently written.
Okay.
So, so it'd be like the typical situation in athletics, like Michael indicated, where a student has a headache or has encountered, you know, some aggressive play on the field that has caused them some injury that ibuprofen could help with. Then those situations would clearly not be emergencies, but under this construction for the athletic program, you could administer it in those situations.
So we're reading the whole thing as if it was part of the athletic program.
No, because it's a separate section.
Okay.
The red edition
No, yeah, I see that,
is the separate section that was added.
right. Okay, well, I don't necessarily read it that way, but
And maybe it needs to be, maybe we need to add another spot in there to be more, to make it more clear. But
I
that's
think
entirely
what
fine.
I'm hearing is that you're struggling with the word emergency, and it
Yeah,
would
I am.
never be an emergency.
yeah, there's
Well, we
a,
would
it
It's
says,
say-
non-prescription medication.
it's an emergency
So,
basis.
like, why
here.
doesn't it just say as needed with parental consent?
Right.
I mean, it's got emergency basis here, and emergency basis is emergency basis. Not, I've got a headache.
Because an emergency would require calling 911,
Right, because-
like
right.
something extra.
And the emergency basis is a subheader though,
Yeah,
so it does, I don't see that athletic program one falling under that, the way it's written. But I think your language clarification makes a whole lot of sense. I think we can add that.
I just don't wanna get in a situation where the district's faced with an emergency, there's no, you know, the medication is there.
Right. I mean, what if you have the opportunity to provide non-prescription medication to help stave off of an emergency?
Right.
Right, right. I mean, I think the confusion here is the colon, right? So in the first sentence there, right, the district shall purchase certain non-prescription medications, right, down to the colon, right? Like, so that kind of, to me, I read it the same thing, right? You get that's all related to the emergency basis.
When I read it the first time, the non-prescription medication meant to me was, okay, we've got an EpiPen, it's not prescribed to, it's not prescribed to Mike Morgan, but it's not prescribed to him, it's a prescription medication generally, but I can administer it to him in the event he has an emergency and I've got parental consent.
Mhm.
That's the way I had read it the first time, when I just went through it and said, oh, okay, I see what it means. Because it wouldn't be prescribed to that particular student.
Yeah, and so, in the section that we're talking about is on the non-prescription medications.
Right.
So I think that's the other distinguishing piece there between that and the EpiPen.
Yeah, and it reads further, it says that may be used to prevent or treat illness or injury.
Yep.
Which is, for example, what they're talking about in terms of a, anaphylactic reaction of some sort, you give them epinephrine.
But that's usually a prescriptive medication,
Right,
right?
but
Yeah,
it's not prescribed to that particular student.
yeah, I understand.
It can't
what
be.
you're saying.
But it also could be in the event that a parent gives, parents bring them in.
Yeah, sure, we hold it for them, have it in the
Hold it for 'em,
nurse's
right.
office or have
Right.
it in the trainer.
Right.
I might be able to add a little clarity.
Sure, please.
Not sure. I'm Mary Lisa Faney, the health director.
Yes,
The athletic program would be the only ones purchasing these over-the-counter non-prescription medications. We wouldn't, as health services, and be giving them out during the day. Parents do that, and they sign consent, and they bring
Right.
us the medication, and that's the medicine we use for that child. But with epinephrine, the athletic program can't even purchase that because it is a prescribed medication
Right.
and you have to have a standing order to get it. Well, right now, the district does have a standing order to receive epinephrine, but we have no standing order to receive over-the-counter medications.
right.
This is allowing the athletic program to work with a physician who agrees to sign off on a group of medications. And I will tell you that group of medications would be listed under the parent consent form. So a parent's gonna see the medicines, and if a parent doesn't agree, they can just say no.
That makes sense, but that's not necessarily what I mean, at least for me.
Mhm.
When you're reading it.
Everyone's welcome to disagree, but
Yeah, thank you for that clarification, I can't talk today, because I was gonna ask about the form. So it is specifically listed on the form, okay.
Yes, sir.
So is the cheerleading team under the athletic programs?
Yes.
Is the dance team under the athletic programs? Is the marching band under the athletic programs? Is the color guard under the athletic programs? I mean, arguably, like, they're all in the same field,
Yeah.
right? So what's the difference?
Athletic trainer, certified athletic trainer.
But everywhere where they are.
I don't know that our trainer,
I mean, I guess at a band competition or a dance competition, there may not be an athletic trainer, but. Right. Or even theater for that matter, right? I mean, I can think of a couple different applications of this.
Totally. I agree.
I can see this working in practice though, as I think through it, and scenarios in my mind, I can see it working, okay? I just wanted to bring that.
Yeah, well, I think the clarification in that language is absolutely, we can definitely work on that. And then I think Chris's question is a good one because extracurricular activities are extracurricular activities, but Mike said the distinguishing factor was the certified athletic trainer, so we'll have to do.
Yeah, I mean, in any of those cases, they would still have to certified athletic trainer or physician, right? I mean, I don't know. I mean, I can think of the, oh my gosh, the teamworks competition, right? Or, you know, I don't know.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm overthinking this.
They're all in athletics, everybody.
It's all physically demanding, right? I mean, so what's the difference?
And then that, on page 2, where you have that on campus, you have an emergency situation, somebody's doing an anaphylactic shock, they're not gonna be prescribed that, right? And it's on campus, it has nothing to do with athletics. And we can administer epinephrine to a kid going into anaphylactic shock.
But I think that's under a doctor's order.
Right, okay. So we can't make that determination, nursing personnel, no one can make that determination on campus.
No, they can make that determination for a life-saving measure, but that's under a doctor's purview. Mary Lisa, how do we say that right?
We have a current order to hold that medication and administer it to any student or staff.
With doctor supervision.
So as soon as we administer it, we're calling that physician and turning in a report.
Right. But who makes the decision on the scene? Would be you guys, right?
Yes, any staff member for BISD, because we train everyone.
You train, right, so you can make that decision.
But I think that's the distinguishing factor between that and like the ibuprofen that you were talking about
Yeah.
earlier. That's the difference right there.
Right.
There's not a standing order with a doctor on this one, and so I think in the development of the policy, like working on this one, it was about enabling the athletic trainers to administer the over-the-counter medicine, non-prescription medicine, if needed.
And the way it's said in the release, it's single dosage on an occasional basis. So it would never be an expectation that a kid suffering from headaches would go by every single day and get ibuprofen from the trainer. That would be, who would refer to the
Yeah, I
favorite
heard
doctor.
that, right?
The emergency
Yes.
basis is
Yeah.
what got me.
And I think maybe making it clear too, because it is the athletic program, a good example would be ICHOT. The nurse's clinic or on campuses anywhere, there's not gonna be even that applied to a student.
Okay.
Whereas an athletic program might use ICHOT for muscle pain.
Right.
But that, again, that's listed on the consent form for the
Understand.
parent.
Yeah.
And we were wanting to distinguish the athletic program may be purchasing these medications.
Sure.
But that's the only
But they're
group
not
that would,
giving those on an emergency basis, right?
it'd be an as-needed basis.
Right.
But, and where I think, where I'm struggling is that, because it doesn't say on an emergency basis under athletic program.
Right.
If we think it might help clarify, we could branch it out into multiple primary headings for medication provided by district in emergency situations versus medication provided by district in discretionary situations.
Bingo.
If
I like
that's-
that.
Okay.
That would make,
Yeah.
yeah,
So,
that would, that
Those
would
may
easily
not
make
have
sense.
I was just thinking, if I'm reading this and I'm the trainer, I need to know what I can and can't do, and when I can do it, and when I cannot do it.
So it's the subheading that was the confusing part, that
Yes.
said emergency
Right,
basis.
right. And not necessarily confusing in my own mind, and knew what needed to be done. done, and I knew what the intent was, but I want it to be as clear as possible.
Mike, yeah, what do you need?
I do. I'll work with Tyler and I'll work with Eric and see if we can give them some language and follow up with that and see if it makes it work.
Thanks, sir.
Absolutely. But as far as the intent for the opioid antagonist, is everyone is fine with that, to move forward with that, so.
Should we go ahead and, let's go ahead and put it on the agenda for a second meeting next time?
I would hold off,
Wait.
let us get the language set
Okay.
first, I think that'd be smart. The next one, we have Mike again on GKD local.
So GKD is one that was up as part of our policy review. There was some legally required language there on page 1 around district provided equal access to youth groups designated in federal law, specifically including Boy Scouts. So making sure that we follow that. But as we studied the policy, we realized we've got some really great partnerships in our community, and we have been willing to partner with community for facility use here at Belton ISD, but we had some things in policy that may not have matched our practices that have been developed over time. So we did go through and clear some things up. The for-profit use, where it says that the original policy says shall not permit individuals for-profit to use facilities for financial gain. However, the district shall permit private instruction, public performances, recitals. We did want to say as well as practices sponsored for-profit athletic groups when the primary participants are district students. There's not an abundance of gym space in this area. A lot of our kids have to travel to Waco, Round Rock, Georgia, or even Austin to participate in club sports. So if there has been some club volleyball teams in particular that need gym space, and if they can show us that the primary beneficiary of that is the Belton ISD students, we've been able to work with them to try to free up some gym space for them to use. So it's not so much that if someone is charging a fee, providing private lessons, anything of those natures, they would have to pay a facility use. But for a club team or something, if we've got an open gym and it keeps our kids from having to drive to Waco or Austin, then we've been willing to partner with them to give them gym space to have practices. So it never, my daughter played on a team. It was all Belton kids, but they had to drive to Waco to practice every week because there was no gym space here at the time back in the volleyball days. So we wanted to work with some groups to do that. And the way the policy was written, it didn't allow us to do that if it was a club team. So that was one thing there on page 1 that we've asked to be able to do. There are several times in here where it was still said the Director of Student Services would be the one to approve schedule requests. We changed all of those to the Assistant Superintendent of Operations and do that through my office. There was also some language in there about use of non-school use of individual recreational areas, such as playgrounds, playfields, things of that nature, that were unlocked, that they could be used when the facilities were not in use. We wanted to make sure the language allowed that we didn't have a policy violation if groups of kids were on playgrounds playing on the weekend, but we did want to put in here that if it's an organized group, we would still like for them to go through and submit a facilities request so we could reserve that facility for them. So we do have a lot of some of our youth soccer teams and things like that use the play fields at our elementary campuses. If we know that they're going to do it, we would like for them to do a request so that we can reserve that for them. If it's an outdoor use in a non-locked facility, it doesn't require custodial services or anything like that. They wouldn't be charged a fee, but if they go ahead and submit a request, we can reserve that facility for them. And that's kind of what it's talking about, the exceptions there of approval for use.
Real quick, on that
yes.
subject, so how does that reservation happen? Like, how does somebody know that space is reserved? Right.
They go through, put in a request with Emily Linder through my office. What generally would happen is something like that, you would have a team on a field, and another team would show up and say, we thought we had this field, and say, well, no one was using it, so we're using it. So that's kind of how we work.
But now the one team says, well, I've got it reserved.
That's right.
Okay.
And then they say, well, how did you get it reserved? Well, we called this, we talked to. So really, it's just making sure to try to get groups that may want to use the same space to be respectful of each other.
Yeah, I'm trying to figure out how we avoid the fight on the field.
Right.
That's what I'm sitting here.
Well, the only way we can is to say we had it rightfully reserved.
Right, yeah, no, I'm with you, okay.
I think the more we get some of those practices in place too, you'll be able to send out weekly schedules and let people know.
I know a couple people that I'm gonna refer to this now.
Yes. Yes.
Most of them are affiliated with the group that we have an organization, I mean, we have a relationship with Ralph Wilson, with BCYC, Belton Youth Football, the Ramont's Taylor Group, I mean, all of the kind of the known players in the youth leagues and stuff, we have relationships with, so generally, if it's a team outside of one of those groups, then they can get in touch with them, and we can talk to whoever kind of their officers or president, or whoever kind of their organizing group, board of directors, whomever, and kind of tell them what the process would be to get into some of our spaces. For some facilities not available, we did, one recommendation we got was districts need to go ahead and include agriculture program facilities. We haven't had a lot of, any requests that I'm aware of people wanting to rent our ag facilities, but that was the recommendation that we include that in there as well. Fees for use is we do have an annual, and it's published, and it's in all facility usage agreements that these different groups sign on what the schedule of fees would be. So if someone is hosting a competition, if they're charging admission, if there's gonna be crowds there and things like that, then generally we do require that they have custodians on site, they have a game administrator or a facility administrator on site. And then if they are charging admission and things about that nature, we are gonna charge them a facility usage fee. So we're not allowing groups to come in and basically turn a profit off of our facilities and not pay us a facility usage fee. And we have a schedule of fees depending on what the facility is, what the usage is for, those types of things, on what those costs will be. And I can share that out with you just so you can see what that is. But we feel like it's more than fair. That would be for like other school districts using our facilities to host playoff games. It might be for an AAU group wanting to come in and host a weekend basketball tournament in one of our campuses. It might be a dance competition. We host a variety of dance competitions throughout the year in some of our gyms and some of our performing arts centers and things of that nature. And so that would be where this is. It's not a practice. It may not even be something that benefits our local groups. And we're going to require to have an administrator there, custodians there, and pay facilities under those conditions. And then I think the last thing is just required conduct. And we do. I mean, if we have a group that's using one of our fields or one of our gyms, and if they're leaving messes, if they're maybe not acting in the way, then we'll have a talk with whoever's in charge of that group, and we'll kind of reestablish what our expectations are. And there's been times that we've had to revoke some usage, some privileges from some groups for just not following the rules. So big thing with safety nowadays is if you have a gym reserved for practice for one of the youth groups or whatever, you'd be expected to have someone man the door. We're not gonna leave doors unlocked. We're not gonna prop doors open. And so that's been one of the things that we've had to talk with some of our groups about too, is if you can't follow the safety guidelines and things, then we would not be able to honor that usage.
Somewhere in here, when I first read through this, it talked about the use of classrooms for something outside of the school day. When I first read it, it looked like we were not going to allow that anymore.
We have not used
So-
classrooms.
The only thing that came to my memory when I was reading that was when we did Project Celebration planning, and parents would come from outside, working with a staff member who maybe volunteered to help facilitate that, and we met in the classroom. So to me, that's kind of the same thing, right? It's not a school function, and we're meeting in the classroom.
So I would almost classify that under the exceptions when it talks about district facilities used for public meetings sponsored by, for state or local government agencies, or for use by district employee professional organizations. We could go, I mean, you're right, but I don't want to think that we're gonna rent classrooms out for people to come in and have.
No, yeah, and it wasn't a rental situation,
Right.
it was just, they told us to meet, meeting room, whatever.
Yeah, I don't know why they wouldn't meet in a commons area or a library or a meeting room area, something like that, but I don't know, I can't.
One thing I can think of is examples. I judged an FFA competition not too long ago that was using classroom facilities as well, so that, I could see different things if you, depended on the circumstance where you might have
Sure.
something.
Oh, for the UIL, the elementary UIL last weekend, I'm certain they used almost probably all the classrooms there. What we're saying in our policy, we won't rent our classroom space out to BCYC or anyone We don't want them in our teachers.
Joe's meeting was in connection with the school.
Yeah, and it, yeah. It's not a school
That's
sponsored.
project, that's my hangup, is that's a
Right.
different one.
Sure.
That is an exception to that, and so that's a,
I think PTA would fall under that.
That's right.
Static. I would absolutely put my PTA group in the classroom to let them meet if they needed it, but I probably wouldn't let Belton Youth Football League come in and use it to have team meetings and things like that. So,
yeah, I think we might. Is there, do you propose anything, adding any language on there or anything?
It might cause people, the way it's written, to think they can't use the classrooms at
Right.
all under any circumstance, the way it's written.
Yeah. And I don't know how we would word it, but we can talk with Tyler a little bit and see if there's some kind of another distinguishing line we can put in there, because I think we're on the same page for the.
Possible solution that I was thinking of was possibly expanding the exceptions to include, I guess, private organizations that work to benefit the district in some way. Like if we tie it to the school, then that could serve as an exception to allow districts to integrate with it.
Because that would involve all students from the ISD.
That's right. Mike, do we have a timeline on this one? Is it okay if we bring this back in April as well?
yeah, it's fine.
Great. So why don't we, oh, let's go ahead, sorry, Chris.
Just in the heading, right, the first two paragraphs, right, we specifically call out Boy Scouts. Do we call out Boy Scouts specifically because federal law says that,
We're
or?
required to specifically name Boy Scouts. I think there was probably a discrimination suit or something by Boy Scouts against the school district, and so that's required by law. So
I wanted the same thing. What does it mean, what does designated federal law mean? In that second paragraph at the top. The district shall provide equal access to youth groups designated as federal.
I mean, honestly, I hate to hear Boy Scouts and not Girl Scouts, right? Like, put them both in there. I mean, it's our local policy, put them both in there.
It does mirror the legal policy.
Yeah.
It's Title 36 of the United States Code, where it defines patriotic societies.
Yeah.
For whatever reason, it does list, because of primary group, Boy Scouts of America.
Yeah, I mean, if that's what mirrors the federal language, I mean, I guess I'm okay, but it just reads funny.
I guess you can always go look
What
up
is designated federal law?
patriotic societies.
Reference. So that's the way that's reading, yeah.
Really?
Or defined.
Are you Googling patriotic
I'm
societies?
not right now. Yeah.
I would like, and Tyler, if you and Mike are gonna look at this thing, I would like indemnity language in wherever it can be put in consistently.
To include it in the policy itself?
Yeah.
Okay, well, and
Not responsible, but, I mean, there's, the word indemnity is used, I think, in one spot, but I think it needs to be used consistently.
sure.
Yeah.
Okay. So- And Michael, I guess for non-school use, is this something that we would regularly have some sort of agreement in place?
there's a user agreement that with any fees and things like that as well.
So, and we can go into greater detail.
We worked with Eric on this prior, so Eric Munoz has worked with us on this in the past, so yeah, you and I can get together and I can talk to Eric as well. So.
I think what we'll do is we'll take a look at a couple pieces of language that we can add to this and bring this back in April to, if you all are okay with that.
Hey, Mike, on page 2 at the top, where you had exception, approval of use, it says no approval shall be required, see that paragraph?
Right.
And then under that it says any organization or organized group that wishes to use and unlock outdoor facilities shall submit a request.
The one at the top's for individual use,
Individual, okay.
and the second is for organizational use. So if I've got an organized soccer team and I want this field every Tuesday at 6 o'clock so we can have practice, we're just asking them to put in a submission so we can reserve that for them, and they would be the rightful user of that. If it's a bunch of kids that show up from the neighborhood and want to play soccer, that they wouldn't need to put in a request.
Understood.
And that would be primarily on our elementary type, elementary facilities or practice fields.
Anything else? I guess the third one, Matt?
This, 3B, yeah, so, our plan is, and just so y'all know, these are the last, 3A, those are the last 3 policies under the TASB policy review. So I think we're getting to a point where we're concluding our big work in the review of 44, that sound right, Melinda? Something like that, 44 local policies that we reviewed and assessed over the last
So this is,
year.
this is it?
Those 3 are the last 3, so I think y'all have done good work and hammered through a lot of policies in the last year and couple months. 3B, policy follow-ups. We have 3 policies that we know of that we needed to follow up and get some direction from you on, and then also wanted to make sure if there were any other policies that you have that you want us to follow up on as we conclude this school year, that we are able to do so as well. First one, Deanna, I'm going to have her just give you a brief overview. This is EIC local, so this is the one on class rank and GPA. There's some minor tweaks that we want to bring back and discuss with you real quick, so I want Deanna to talk to you about that.
So as you'll recall, when we did all of our very thorough work on EIC, we set up for 4 levels. And the highest level, level 4, we limited to 8 AP courses. And then our intent was that you would take as many level 3 courses as your heart desired. Those level 3 would be our AP, pre-AP, dual credit, and advanced CTE. However, as we've started to have those conversations, we've learned and realized that the more level 3 courses that you take actually lowers the GPA than if you had, than if you just, the less you take, the higher your GPA. And we don't want that because we're limiting the level 4. And so there is a fix to that, and worked with some, actually I talked with some parents, I've worked with Skyward, and the fix to it is that we move to a level 3 system. So we keep our level 3s in place, and our level 4 courses will add as bonus points to the GPA and not be calculated in the GPA. Does that make sense? And I could show you on the board if you want to do any kind of calculations, but I'm recommending we bring that policy back, and we will have the level 4 used as an add-on to the calculated GPA so that you're not lowering it. If you think about it, 8 points at 8 classes at a 7.0, anything underneath that is going to start lowering that GPA. And so 8 classes at level 3 lowers it at 1 level. We would know that, but then 12 at that would lower it even more. And we don't want that. That's never what we intended. And so we just need to change how that level 4 is calculated.
So when you say bonus points, does that mean that if you take a level 4, you can only increase your GPA?
It will only add to your GPA.
Okay.
And it'll only add for the 8 courses. And so those 8 courses we recommend actually, so this actually solves several of our issues that when we had the policy, because one of the things we talked about and was concerned was, what about when you're in that class, does it hurt your GPA? And we want to make sure only the top ones count, if you won't need to do that anymore. So at level 3, everything is calculated into the GPA, as it's always been, and then the taking 8 will add on to that GPA. And so it's incentivizing you to say, you know what, you should try 8 AP courses. If you want to take more, no harm on that at all in your GPA, but it is right. It is kind of we'll recommend basically.
Now, this policy applied to incoming freshmen
It does.
last year, so we would make it retroactive, whatever change we made?
So normally we do not like to do that. However, the way the policy was written, we weren't actually we weren't calculating those level 4 until their sophomore year. And so because of that, it's not going to impact kids that are currently freshmen, which is normally you never want to touch this
I
policy
understand.
when kids are in
Yeah.
place. So I'll be bringing a revise of that to you. We worked with Skyward, we've talked with them about how to calculate it. And so I've got that into Holly for review, and I'll be bringing that back.
Good.
I'm also glad to hear that there is a way to do these things in Skyward, because I know at first that was.
Yeah, there's a lot of question about that.
That's a challenge.
And so, and this is, I just wanna say, because I think it's important, you know, when we enact these policies, this is a partnership of parents that I met with a couple of parents that came and talked with me, wonderful folks, and they had one solution. We looked at their solution, we're gonna do something, we're recommending something a little bit differently, but the conversation roots and partnership with parents, and I think that's important.
Yeah.
So,
Timing works out well with the policy
Very well.
and action and stuff,
Glad.
so I think it works very well to bring that back to you next month. We want to make sure you knew we had a follow-up on that one.
and I can, any questions you have,
So
feel
we'll
free
look
to
at
get with
this,
me.
April, and then bring it to the full board in May.
Correct.
It will go to the April board meeting for second reading.
Oh, it could go to the April board meeting if you're all okay with
Yeah,
that.
I don't see why I couldn't, yeah.
So,
I would like for it to, if possible, that way we can get
Yeah, so the
everything
sooner the better.
communicated to parents
Sure.
in May. Right now, I've just told parents, just select courses that are in the best interest of your child and your child's future, and then we will be updating you, prior to this. It would be nice to have that done.
I'd love to see an example, it doesn't necessarily need to be right here.
Sure.
It sounds good, but just to help me be able to talk about it.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
I
absolutely.
think it'd be good for us to go through an example when we do the first readings
Yeah.
and stuff, because I think that y'all need to dive back into that one.
Yep,
Sure.
it's rusty.
Yes, been a little while.
But not just that, Matt, but maybe even when we present to the full board, perhaps, we should spend a little bit more time on that.
Sounds good.
Yeah.
We can see how the first reading goes and we'll go from there.
And then not have this go through consent, maybe.
Right,
Yeah.
yeah.
Excellent, thank you, Deanna. Mr. Schiller is bringing one, this is a policy follow-up back. We talked about this in our Team of 8 training back in July about administrative hiring. Todd, what policy is that?
DC.
DC, and specifically about administrative hiring and superintendent being able to hire administrators through the summertime when we meet less frequently and stuff often. So we plan on bringing that one back to you as well and following up on that discussion we had in the summertime. And then finally, EFB local, and that is the instructional materials and library resources. And we know that you'd asked for a follow-up on that, and so we wanted to make sure we had really clear direction on that follow-up on next steps that you'd like to see.
So do we need to talk anything about the DC, that's DC local, right?
Yeah, I don't think so. I think we're all set on that one, and we'll bring that back to y'all. I just want to make sure that y'all had talked about that as a follow-up, and so we're bringing it back to you with the appropriate follow-up.
Good. So in terms of EFB local, I mean, is there anything that we need to discuss now?
I mean, I don't think we can, right, it's just that it needs to come back.
Any guidance that you would like to give us on specific things to take a look at, we'd be glad to take a look at that to bring that back.
I have some thoughts.
You know,
Chris?
I mean, one of the questions I had was around, do you educate people on what the penal code means, or do you not educate them on what the penal code means, right? I mean, it is vague in theory intentionally, right, so that it means something different potentially to everybody. And so, should we provide guidance on that or not? I'm not sure where I stand on that. But that was like my primary question prior activities.
okay. I think
also, the makeup of the committee, right? Is there a way for us to potentially increase parent representation on the committee, like as a portion of the committee? Was also another thought.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we probably need a full review of it. And look at it.
Yeah.
There might be a better way, there might be a better expedited way, there might be a better way to make everyone happy. I don't know, if that's possible.
I'm not sure that's possible.
I don't know if that's possible. It's an incredibly complicated issue, it's not one-sided, but it is, I think I know the heart of this board, and I know the heart of this district is to protect children, and I don't appreciate being told that we don't care about that, because we do, every day, or otherwise we wouldn't be here. but we definitely wanna look at that, and we want it to be right and good and fair.
I will say, I think there's amazing bones, right, that need to be tweaked. I don't see it overall.
You know, in terms of the language that's in there, I don't know that I agree with the use of the phrase penal code. 'Cause I think that connotates a very super high standard for a committee to look at. So if I'm sitting on a committee and I see penal code and I see the definition of it, and most people are gonna think about criminal action, okay? So even though you may not agree that that particular reading or book or what have you should be on the shelf, if you look at that, you may say, well, I don't like what's in there, but I don't know that that's criminal, then I'm gonna vote to keep it on the shelf. So my view would be that we use the language that's in the penal code, but we take penal code out of the equation in terms of the phrase. Because that sets a super high standard for a committee that is leaning towards removing a particular book, but gets stuck on the phrase penal code, says, well, gosh, I don't think it's criminal. I don't like it, but I guess I'm gonna have to vote to leave it on there, because that's those are the instructions I am given by this policy. So that's one thing. The second thing is that I think that when someone is coming up with their reasons why a book should stay or not stay, there needs to be more open-ended questions as opposed to yes or no, check the box, so that you can see that it was properly evaluated. Because obviously, if it comes up to a level 3, we need to make sure that whoever did the work, and that they were thorough. I mean, it's coming to us for a reason, obviously because somebody wants it off of the shelf, okay? So I think we need to see how much of that penal code language we can leave in there, and whether we can use an and or an or. And then the other part of that equation is the phrase that was talked about a lot, and we had some discussions about that. What was the phrase, Janet? I'm trying to think of the language.
Pervasively vulgar.
Pervasively vulgar. I mean, I know what pervasively vulgar means to me as an individual, but as I understand it, there's no guidance in the law for that. So you could be all over the place, okay? And that sounds like a super high standard if you're reviewing some material that's supposed to be on the shelf, okay? So, and remember, we're talking about 14-year-olds.
Right. On the flip side of that, the First Amendment is a super high standard.
Sure, I understand.
So, like, the standard is high.
It is high, of course. And I'm not saying that we would draft a policy that's in contravention of the First Amendment rights. The First Amendment is what causes this whole thing anyway. Okay, the First Amendment is what prevents us from going over on the shelf and pulling something off the shelf that if Manuel Alcocer doesn't like it, he can't just go over there and pull it off the shelf. It doesn't work that way because of the First Amendment. All right, so yes, it benefits us as a society, but it's also it's a thorn in our side when it comes to doing things like this and having to make decisions. So I think we need to look at pervasively vulgar and see what that, see if it's defined somewhere. Perhaps someone else has defined it, and whether we can actually define it in the policy. But I think we need to know legally what can we put in this policy or not put in there. Because if we pull a book, the public needs to understand that we have to be able to defend that decision. We can't just pull because there may be 100 parents there, and 20 of those may want some of that stuff on the shelf. So does their voice matter? I don't know, but I think the law thinks it matters. So I think we have to look at that also. And then take another look at our form, make sure that our form, when someone files a complaint and wants to challenge a book, that they have done they've done their homework as well. Yeah. Some of these things about having to come in and have how many books are there? 18,000 titles?
Is that what it is, Deanna?
That's at Lake Belton High School alone. We probably have 100,000 titles.
And some of these titles have been on the shelf for how long? Decades, potentially, right?
At other at other campuses,
Yeah.
we could have those.
Right. So it's a tough thing to handle, and just like the EIC policy. Now it's put into place, and we kind of see, oh, wait a minute, and we got a little hole here. Same thing with this policy. Once you put it into place, it starts to reveal its strengths and weaknesses.
Yeah, and unfortunately, you know, when we went through the level 3, manual spoke to this, how a policy and law in its infancy is just that, it's an infant.
That's it.
And it has to be tested before it can become firm and good reality and working for everyone. And that's the place we're in now. There's no shame in reworking it. None of us feel that. We know that that probably needs to be done, especially when something is this sensitive and this complicated. And, you know, I would just say, like, the form, particularly for the committee, that, I think that one, it wasn't detailed enough. And what Manuel is saying in regard to listing the actual parts of the penal code without it being all the numbers and all of that stuff, and just that, does it break this, yes or no? I think we need to let people really see what they're saying yes and no to.
Anything else?
We need to we need to have some conversation about what does the level 3 actually mean? What is the expectation for the level 3? And how does the level 3 support the level 1 and level 2 that came before it?
The only other thing that I is thinking about some of these things when we talk about forms and stuff, I think I'll want to also take a look about guidance and initial selection as well, so that we're clear that the guidance and the review of a book is the same type of guidance that we would want people to go through in the initial selection of titles for a collection.
Yes.
So make sure that is
We get on the back of the process, the
clearly
beginning of the process.
aligned.
Yep, can you state that again
Yeah.
for the record?
Yeah, well, yes, but I think just to make sure when we make a tweak to that, I wanna make sure that those things are directly aligned, and I told you all this in different times, I think this is working out good in all of this, because you're trying to address a thoughtful process, do it right, but also recognize and uphold values that are important to our community, and I think that's important, to do it the right way, to recognize those values, and to make sure we hold those at a high standard. And so I appreciate your work on it, and we'll start chipping away at some stuff.
And you also don't want to, if you pull a book, and then it gets challenged by some organization. So now now the district's in a federal lawsuit somewhere because the process wasn't right. And they don't agree with the decision to pull a book.
And I think the ease of being able to do that and do it the right way is the balance that we're striving for.
That's right.
Anything else on EFD local?
What about issues for future concern? Have we exhausted our?
Well, and I wanted to ask real quickly before we move on, if there are any other policy follow-ups that we want to take care of here before we hit summertime. We've got, I know it's hard to believe, but we've got 3 more policy committee meetings until, that's April, May, June, until we take our summer pause. And so before we finalize that and take that pause, are there any other policy follow-ups that y'all have?
I can't think of any right now. I mean,
I'm gonna blur this into agenda item 4.
Okay.
If I can do that. Like I know we had a presentation, I don't know if it was a workshop around behavior and discipline and sort of like the listening sessions, feedback. I'd like to take that one step further from a board understanding standpoint, right? Like so, okay, I understand policy, right, is where we live, but I need to understand a little bit more about like how's that, I want to learn more about how that policy is actually put into practice, right? So what does that look like at the classroom level? Like what does that look like at the campus level? Just to, top to bottom, if you understand what I'm saying.
I think I do.
Yeah.
changes to something like that, like after we've had those listening sessions, how we
Right.
make sure consistent.
Yeah, and the thought there is, like, I'm hearing feedback that is inconsistent from the debrief that we had.
Yeah.
Right, and so like it doesn't, like people are saying things about what they can and can't do that doesn't make sense, like it's not consistent with the framework debrief that we have. And so I really wanna understand, you know, what does that look like?
Sounds good.
You wanna see what kind of discipline we have in the district, what's being done to discipline
Okay,
kids?
so I'll give you a general example, because I don't wanna talk about a specific example
Right.
in this setting. So, you know, if I have had a teacher say, well, I can't address this, that, or the other thing because my hands are tied. Well, okay, who tied your hands? Right, like, because what you're saying doesn't make any sense to me, right? Like what we're saying in this setting is, yeah, that particular situation should be able to be addressed, right? But what I'm hearing at the ground level, right, is, well, I can't address that, right? So there's a disconnect somewhere, right? And I don't understand how the policy, right, or the sort of the frameworks in this place are being carried forward into the campus and into the classroom.
Yep.
Does that make sense? Okay. Because it's a discipline issue, and I'm not talking about specifics, right?
Okay,
Anything else from you?
nothing else. Well, Matt, just digressing for just a moment. Any
Sir.
policies that you think that we need to?
We brought them up with the administrative hiring one and EIC local, those are the two that we brought up that we've spoken about in the past that we feel like need to be addressed in some tweaks.
We probably, when we start talking about the instructional materials and whatnot, we probably need to have Holly here, or Tyler, or somebody here for those.
Holly and Tyler are almost always present in our policy committee meetings, so
Okay.
yes, we will make sure that happens.
Okay.
Save us from ourselves.
That's right.
Well, I guess that's it for the agenda, right?